undo it.
There seems to be a problem with your checking account.
Just undo it.
Traffic is backed up for 2 miles on...
Just undo it. At the end of the day, just step into your own private spa and just undo it.
For free literature, call now, 263-7171. Calls answered 24 hours.
The television voice of Iowa Hawkeye basketball since 1987. In 1990 and 91, he was named Iowa's Sportscaster of the Year. So, Larry Morgan, what are you going to do next?
I'm going to Disneyland. I'm doing the Iowa Cubs on Heritage Cablevision.
This is CNN.
Well, it looks like a bomb went through it. This was in total disarray now, and when we went to bed last night, it was picked up. It wasn't like this at all. This is what happened from the first quake.
All my things were destroyed. All my personal possessions, they're gone, they're broke. All we have to be thankful for is our lives.
We just were rocking. It's like one big roller coaster ride.
I won't step a foot back in there. I'm moving. I'm selling everything I got, and I'm moving out of state. I don't trust these apartments. I never trust them again in my life.
I really think there's another one coming, and I think it's going to be a lot bigger.
Fears of the big one rattle many a nerve in California as the state trembles with aftershocks. Hi, welcome to CNN Morning News. I'm Bob Kane.
Hello, I'm Donna Kelley. This morning, another earthquake, this time shaking an area 70 miles northwest of Las Vegas, measuring 5.6 on the Richter scale.
We will talk a little later on what to do when an earthquake does hit. A seismologist will join us to take your calls.
We want to recap yesterday's events for you. 2 powerful earthquakes rocked Southern California.
One measured 7.4 on the Richter scale. That's huge. The other was downgraded to 6.5 from an earlier report of 7.0.
The smaller earthquake was centered near Big Bear Lake. The larger one struck Yucca Valley, Joshua Tree, and 29 Palms.
All right, now let us check in with CNN correspondent Greg Lamont. He's in Yucca Valley for an update on where things stand at this point. Morning, Greg.
Good morning. The sun has just come up here in Southern California, where it's just after 6 a.m. Pacific time. It is the same time in Las Vegas, but people there have been up for about 3 hours, although some people never go to sleep in Las Vegas. As you said, an earthquake that was separate from the 2 that hit Southern California rumbled through that gambling mecca. The quake was measured at 5.6 on the Richter scale. It hit epicenter at 70 miles northwest of Las Vegas. That's very close to the Nevada nuclear test site. There are no reports of damage or injuries in that quake. That was apparently a quick 5 to 10 second jolt, enough to wake people up or in some cases change the fortunes for some, as it forced the white ball into the red instead of the black on the roulette table. Here in Southern California, the nerves are frayed. It was a night of numerous aftershocks, a sleepless night for many, especially with the lingering threat that a bigger quake could happen. And for many, it was just a case of being too afraid to go to sleep.
My 4-year-old's thinking about moving back to Seattle, but I don't know. We're going to pray about it. We'll see. We'll see how things go.
I won't step a foot back in there. I'm moving. I'm selling everything I got, and I'm moving out of state.
It's pretty scary, but since we're all together as a unit, it makes things less nervous.
You never know. These apartments aren't real strong, and then could just fall through. I was with my mom. I was on her on the other side because she had Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't sleep inside because it's really, really scary.
Maybe a youngster, but they certainly know what they're talking about. I took the crew to a local hotel about 9 o'clock last night to try to catch about 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But with aftershocks about every 5 minutes, there was no sleep. As far as public safety, highway crews will continue looking for cracks and buckles in the roadways today. 3 highways were shut down yesterday because of severe buckling, but those roads should be open today. Efforts to ensure water safety will continue. People are being advised not to drink tap water because of some water main breaks. People are being told to buy bottled water or at least boil the water that they use. It's being suggested today that it will be a busy day for insurance adjusters following the more than $11 million in damage. Donna, Bob?
Greg, you mentioned those aftershocks, and they were coming about every 5 minutes when you were trying to get some sleep, and numerous ones. One report I saw this morning said about 1,000 aftershocks. Tell us how strong they feel to you, and are they still coming at this point?
We felt one not too long ago that shook the ground fairly strong. It's different when you're outside. When you feel an aftershock, it's less severe in its nature. But when you're in a hotel room or in a building, it shakes the whole building. Some last as much as 3-4 seconds. Others last for just a second. The fear aspect comes is that when you start to feel one, you initially think that it's an aftershock and you think it'll go away in a second. But if it lasts 1 second too long, then you begin to think, uh-oh, we're having another large earthquake.
Greg, I believe the bowling alley that is just behind you was one of the more seriously damaged structures in Yucca Valley. What does the rest of the town look like?
You're right. This is about as serious as it gets here in Yucca Valley. I think part of the reason is that it's a rural area. You don't have too many 2-story, 3-story, or high-rise buildings. In fact, there are none. They're mostly single-story buildings. They're all separated from each other, and so you don't get the effects of one building falling down on another as you might in an urban area. The damage is pretty much fallen bricks, shattered windows and storefronts. There's some homes that garages caved in on one side. But for the most part, given the size of this earthquake, 7.4, which is huge, it's amazing that there wasn't much more damage.
Greg Lamont in Yucca Valley, California. People across the nation today are also turning their focus on the nation's highest court. We may find out in as little as an hour the Supreme Court's ruling on Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
And that is the Pennsylvania case that has sparked a war over abortion rights. We will have a live report, and that's coming up just shortly.
Right now we have a brand new week underway.
Almost 6 minutes after the hour. We're glad you could join us, of course, on this Monday morning. We'll find out what's going on in the weather with Valerie Voss. Val, good morning.
Good morning. Of course,
for work on the case of the Pennsylvania abortion case. It's called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Probably it could be just a couple of minutes before we know if the U.S. Supreme Court hands down its decision, and then it will be a couple of minutes before we know what their ruling is. But we'll be listening to see if, in fact, they do hand out the paperwork, and we'll be going to them in just a couple of minutes to find that out.
Right now, here's a look at some of the stories making headlines around the world.
UN peacekeeping forces in Bosnia-Herzegovina have yet to get relief flights into Sarajevo. Serb forces reportedly have stopped shelling the city but have not withdrawn their tanks from the airport. In Belgrade, tens of thousands of Serbs are demanding the resignation of President Milosevic. He is widely blamed for the wars in Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina.
In South Africa, about 25,000 people mourned the victims of the June 17th Township massacre. A mass funeral service for most of the victims was held today. The African National Congress declared a day of mourning and most people stayed home. In Johannesburg, protesters demanded the resignation of President F.W. de Klerk. The U.S. Embassy there also closed to observe the day of mourning.
In Russia, the government has expressed interest to the International Whaling Commission in resuming whaling. The IWC says Russia has asked for a limited whaling permit for research purposes. The former Soviet Union was involved in an international commercial whaling moratorium imposed by the IWC in 1985.
In Britain, environmentalists demonstrated outside the Norwegian embassy yesterday to protest that country's efforts to resume commercial whaling. Meanwhile, the International Whaling Commission began a 5-day meeting in Scotland where hundreds of demonstrators also gathered. The IWC will decide whether to resume commercial whaling on a limited basis.
Typhoon Bobbie has hit the Japanese island of Okinawa with winds up to 90 miles an hour. No injuries are reported on Okinawa, but all civilian flights have been canceled and schools on the island are closed.
Central planners of the former Soviet Union have left a dead sea and a poisoned environment in part of Uzbekistan. In this edition of Earth Matters, CNN's Shoban Darrow reports on the Aral Sea, an ecological disaster in Central Asia.
This baby girl could consider herself lucky to be alive. 1 in 10.
Abortion case is called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Reporters there milling around waiting to see if that certain case number is announced, and if it is, then it will take them a couple of minutes to find out what the ruling is, and we'll have our CNN correspondent Anthony Collins on hand. He will brief us on what it says, and then we'll have guests who will have a reaction and analysis for us. Bob?
Here is an update of our lead stories. No injuries or damage, no serious damage reported in this morning's earthquake about 70 miles northwest of Las Vegas. 2 major quakes yesterday in Southern California killed 1 child and injured more than 350 other people. People in Yucca Valley camped out overnight to avoid aftershock fallout. Homes and businesses in the area were damaged, roads buckled, water and electricity lines cut.
Let us go now to Valerie Voss, and we'll see what is happening in the weather. She had a lot to talk about when I asked her.
Morning, Val.
Good morning, Bob. A stormy morning once again across parts of Texas, and as you can...
Plus so much more. Call now for 4 free issues. Kiplinger will bill you for $48, a $15 savings off the regular rate. If you're not satisfied, return the bill marked cancel and owe nothing. Call 1-800-776-6300. That's 1-800-776-6300.
We are going to look once again at a live shot of the press room at the United States Supreme Court, where reporters are assembled. A clerk has, we are told now, just brought in a huge stack of decisions which are being announced by the justices today.
And what will happen, reporters wait for the paperwork, and then case numbers are announced. And the number that we will be listening for in this Planned Parenthood versus Casey is number 91744. Number 91744. That is the Pennsylvania abortion case decision. And then reporters will get the paperwork, and they'll have to go over it and see what the ruling is. And we'll have our correspondent, Anthony Collins, who will go through that and give us the information, and then we will have analysis and reaction.
Any portion of the Pennsylvania law upheld by the High Court will be decried by abortion rights activists. Any portion of the law held up will be supported and praised by what are called anti-abortion activists. We're going to take a break now for our local cable stations, and when we continue during the course of World Day, we will be bringing you a complete update and coverage of whatever happens today in the High Court. Stay with us.
Coming up, World Day, followed by Day Watch, after a word from your local cable system, here on CNN.
We were young and innocent, and we moved to a special kind of music. We called it slow dancing.
To order, call toll-free 1-800-257-1257 to save all COD charges and pay only $19.98 for records or cassettes or $24.98 for CDs, plus $4 shipping. Use your credit card or send check or money order to Slow Dancing, P.O. Box 8250, Atlanta, Georgia. Remember, save COD charges by sending check or money order or use your credit card.
This is CNN.
The abortion showdown. The press is gathered awaiting this term's Supreme Court ruling on limits on abortion, which is expected momentarily.
And 3 earthquakes fray nerves and damage millions of dollars of property in the American West. Welcome to our viewers in the United States. This is World Day. I'm Bobbie Battista.
And I'm Reid Collins in Washington. Just moments from now, the United States Supreme Court is expected to rule on the most important abortion case of this term. CNN's Anthony Collins joins us now live from the plaza of the Supreme Court. Tony?
We're waiting outside the Supreme Court now for the announcement of the court's decision in the Pennsylvania abortion case. The broader issue here is whether abortion is no longer a fundamental right in the United States, whether the court overturns Roe versus Wade. That was the 1973 decision legalizing abortion. The Bush administration has asked the court to now overturn Roe versus Wade. The more immediate issue is whether a Pennsylvania law is upheld. That Pennsylvania law merely restricts abortion. It does not outlaw it. And here's what's involved. First of all, there is a waiting period of 24 hours before a woman can have an abortion. Then there is informed consent. That means that she must hear a lecture, a government written speech that a doctor must give to her explaining the alternatives to abortion and explaining fetal development. And then thirdly, a woman must notify her husband before having the abortion, and minors need their parents' consent before having the operation. The situation now is that the press room at the Supreme Court is the scene where the decision will be handed out. The telephone that you see is the one where Tony House, the press spokesperson for the Supreme Court, will receive a phone call from upstairs where the 9 justices are in session. When that phone rings, she is told whether they have now released the Pennsylvania abortion decision or not. And what is going on inside the court at this time is that they have, this is the final day of their term, and they have two remaining decisions. One involves property rights and environmental laws in South Carolina, and the other one, of course, is the Pennsylvania abortion restriction law. The court has announced that today is the last day of the current term, and that would indicate that both of those decisions must be handed down today, unless for any reason the court decides to rehear the arguments in the abortion case, in which case it would be carried over until next term, beginning on the first Monday in October. We will have more live coverage later this morning. Anthony Collins, CNN Live at the Supreme Court.
Tony, just a question here before you go, and we'll be getting back to you. How has the Pennsylvania law fared in the appeals procedure? Is it winning or losing there?
Pennsylvania law is basically winning in the appeals procedure. A lower court upheld almost all of the Pennsylvania law. The only part of the law that was struck down by the lower court was the husband notification provision, that a wife must tell her husband before having an abortion. The Supreme Court, when it agreed to review the Pennsylvania law, it agreed to review all parts of the law, the parts that were upheld by the lower court and the one part that was struck down. So what we are waiting to find out this morning is whether the Supreme Court will uphold all of the Pennsylvania law, which would go beyond the lower court, or possibly uphold only part of it, basically repeating what the lower court did.
You know, abortion rights advocates, Tony, say that if any of this is affirmed or upheld, it will be an intrusion, if not a reversal of Roe versus Wade, on the principle that at least the right of privacy that blankets Roe Wade has been exposed.
Yes, and in fact, the Supreme Court in 1986 struck down a very similar Pennsylvania law because it violated Roe versus Wade, the fundamental right of abortion. But there is division on the court, at least earlier this year in the oral arguments in this case, as to whether they necessarily must reach all the way to the ultimate question of Roe in order to decide on the Pennsylvania case.
All right, so we're going to wait for the Pennsylvania decision at least, which should come down shortly, we're led to believe, although there's no law that says it must. Bobbie?
In other news, the earthquake total for the western U.S. stands at 3, but that could change. The latest quake, measuring 5.6 on the Richter scale, was centered 70 miles northwest of Las Vegas when it hit today at 6:14 a.m. Eastern. There are no reports of significant damage or injuries, and the U.S. Geological Survey says the Nevada quake is probably not related to yesterday's 2 quakes in Southern California. This is what the second one looked like in Joshua Tree.
We should go now back to the press room where panic has ensued as the phone has rung and decisions are being passed out now. We have some audio coming out of there, but it doesn't sound too orderly as far as the highest court in the land is concerned. This isn't it. This is the press room where the atmosphere changes considerably. Rather rare sight. The fact that the cameras are there is indicative of the importance attached by the United States and its citizenry to this Pennsylvania abortion restriction case. In the small amount of time available for digestion, we will let you know what the court has ruled. It's complicated, of course. It's not just up or down, yes or no, and we want to make sure that we understand it at least preliminarily before we get out very far on a limb on a very important issue such as this one. So as soon as CNN can tell you definitively what the court has said about the Pennsylvania case, we'll be back and we'll do that. All right, Tony Collins is with our expert, and as we see, we are getting a quick, almost virtually a curbstone opinion here at the front of the Supreme Court Plaza.
Bob, it looks like they've upheld Roe.
All right, so we now have Tony. If you can hear me, we can hear you. So give us just a quick first blush opinion of the opinion.
We are reading through the opinion right now, And this opinion is very complicated. There are parts of it which talk about confirming Roe's essential holding. There's a part that says Roe's essential holding should be reaffirmed, but because it is complicated, we want to read through it very carefully. This decision that was handed down today comes after years of controversy. For women in Pennsylvania and throughout the country, abortions have been legal ever since Roe versus Wade. But the Pennsylvania case showed how much the Supreme Court's views on abortion have changed over the years. In 1973, when there were more liberals on the court, the Roe versus Wade decision said abortion is a fundamental right.
A fetus is a baby.
Amid continuing controversy, in 1986, the court struck down a Pennsylvania law restricting abortion because the court found it violated Roe. But 3 years later, the High Court said states could restrict abortion. Pennsylvania's legislature then enacted what was basically the same law. Under it, a woman may have an abortion only after waiting 24 hours, hearing a doctor inform her about fetal development and alternatives to abortion, and telling her husband. Minors need their parents' consent.
I don't see it as intruding unduly, given the irrevocability and the finality of the choice in terms of the life of the child. I don't see it as an undue burden. I think it's something that is entirely appropriate.
Claiming that the law was intended to create obstacles, the staff at an abortion clinic saw the 24-hour wait as forcing some women to make 2 round trips of up to 5 hours each.
They have more actual risk on the road, more missed school or missed work, more income loss. It's extremely burdensome on our patients from the rural areas.
Abortion rights advocates won lower court orders temporarily preventing the law from going into effect. But a federal appeals court upheld almost all of the Pennsylvania law except for spousal notification.
This is a separate opinion.
Okay. We are reading through the opinion right now. With me is Paul Rothstein from the Georgetown Law Center. We have a very thick and a very complicated opinion on both the Pennsylvania law restricting abortion and on the ultimate question of Roe versus Wade. On your first glance, what do you see as the decision today?
It's significant that they say right out up front that Roe versus Wade is upheld, and they speak very strongly of a woman's right to an abortion. However, they do make one modification of Roe versus Wade. They say the state has an interest throughout the pregnancy in protecting an unborn child. But what they say is that it must be a very strong interest to do anything before the point of viability. So what we're saying here is, and what I see thus far, and we'll have to analyze it further, is that there is a slight relaxation of Roe versus Wade, but that the basic principles of Roe versus Wade are upheld. It looks to me, however, like they are saying that most of the Pennsylvania abortion restrictions are okay, but it is significant that they haven't opened the door to states wholesale burdening the woman's right to have an abortion and making it very difficult for her to have an
Let me ask you this. Prior to this decision, we had 4 sure votes for overturning Roe. The Chief Justice, Rehnquist, Justices White, Scalia, and Kennedy.
That's correct.
Now, did those 4 manage to find a 5th vote, the one they needed in order to finally overturn Roe?
No, Roe is not overturned. Roe stands on the books in somewhat watered-down fashion, but they have not opened the door to states wholesale repealing the right to an abortion, prohibiting abortion, or even restricting it with very onerous restrictions. They seem to be saying that some restrictions are all right, some are not, that if the state is trying to stop abortions before viability, that's in the first and even second trimester.
Viability meaning?
When the baby can live outside the womb if it were removed at that time. What they seem to be saying is that that's the area that the state must stand back from and not regulate too stringently, the area before viability. After viability, which comes in the 3rd trimester, then the state has a right to protect the unborn child quite strongly.
Thank you. Reid?
Thank you. Paul, does this appear to give both sides of this issue room for claiming victory?
Does this give both sides of the issue something that they can point to?
Yes, it seems to be, quote, a Solomonic decision. It seems to be giving a little bit to both sides in an attempt to somehow be reasonable if there is any kind of compromise possible on this terribly inflammatory issue.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, and we'll be getting back to you as more and more of the decision in the Pennsylvania case becomes apparent. You know, abortion has had a long history in the United States. Before modern medical procedures were made available, abortion could become a dangerous, even a deadly procedure. Ethical codes did not always take this into account, and CNN's Mark Leff reports.
The abortion controversy goes back thousands of years. The ethical code attributed to the Greek physician Hippocrates forbids doctors to prescribe or suggest poisons or drugs to induce abortions. Through and beyond the colonial years, when homemade potions were a common and often dangerous way to end pregnancies, American laws against abortion early in the pregnancy still reflected English common law and were aimed mostly at preventing the use of poisons. Gynecology was a relatively new medical specialty in the 19th century, when most people who assisted or prevented childbirth were not licensed physicians. The American Medical Association, established in 1847, began a legal campaign to ban abortions by unlicensed practitioners, and later took a moral position condemning most women wanting abortions. Some historians link the 19th century anti-abortion campaign to fears that the children of immigrants from mostly Catholic Europe could eventually dominate the native-born Protestant population if abortion remained legal. Whatever the motivation, by the turn of the century, every state in the Union had passed laws forbidding abortion unless at least one physician certified the woman's life was endangered, though the statutes were not always enforced. The goals of the women's movement in that era were aimed more at getting the right to vote than getting the right to an abortion. Through much of the 20th century, women's role in society changed faster than state abortion laws did. In 1965, the Supreme Court overturned a Connecticut law forbidding married couples to use contraceptives and said clauses in the Bill of Rights implied a constitutional right to privacy. State laws in most of the country in the early 70s banned abortion unless the mother's life was in danger. But 4 states did allow virtually unrestricted abortions in the first few months after conception. By some estimates, thousands of women traveled to New York and the other states for legal abortions they could not get at home.
I'm a role model to many women.
In 1970, Norma McCorvey was unmarried and pregnant, but not in danger of dying. She challenged the Texas abortion law anonymously as Jane Roe, suing Dallas County prosecutor Henry Wade. The case worked its way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. In January 1973, Justice Harry Blackmun wrote the court's majority opinion for that case and a similar suit in Georgia. The decision in Roe v. Wade extended the court's constitutional interpretation on privacy to include abortion. But while it ruled abortion within 3 months of conception is a private medical matter in which government may not interfere, Blackmun also wrote that government may regulate abortion after that, both to promote the mother's health and later in the pregnancy because of what he called government's interest in the potentiality of human life. The Supreme Court decision invalidated any state abortion laws that were stricter than the new federal standard. A number of states have rewritten their abortion laws, in part to see whether an increasingly conservative Supreme Court might re-examine and perhaps reverse its 1973 ruling that made abortion legal nationwide. The court has addressed abortion in several major cases, generally agreeing with state laws requiring minors to get adult permission and upholding some other conditions that, in the court's view, stop short of making abortions impossible to get. The latest ruling is the end of the legal argument on a single Pennsylvania case, but by no means the end of the public argument on the issue. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
As we may have heard, the Supreme Court has reached its decision in a Pennsylvania abortion case, the Pennsylvania law that sets limits on abortion in that state. Let's go back to CNN's Anthony Collins at the Supreme Court Plaza, who joins us now live. Tony?
Yes, Reid, we have a very complicated decision, and of course it is the most important decision of this term. It looks like the Supreme Court has upheld at least parts of a Pennsylvania law that does impose restrictions on abortion, but the court seems to be split on Roe versus Wade. That was the 1973 decision legalizing abortion, saying that it is a fundamental right. It would appear that the 4 justices who wanted to overturn Roe did not get the 5th vote they needed in order to overturn Roe versus Wade. That is what it appears to be on a preliminary first reading of this opinion. We need to look at it more closely, But with us is Paul Rothstein from the Georgetown Law Center. Paul, you've been busily reading through this very complicated decision. What is your impression as to what happened today?
At this point, it looks to me as though they have upheld the lower court's decision. That is, that the Pennsylvania restrictions on abortion are all right, except for notifying a husband. That is an undue burden. That is too restrictive. But requiring consent from parents, or if the parents can't give it a judicial consent, that was okay. 24-hour waiting period with information during that waiting period, such as the developmental stage of the fetus, the alternatives to abortions, the risk. That seems to have been okay from what I am able to get here. But the most important thing is that there is a ringing endorsement that Roe versus Wade must be upheld on the basis of precedent, that too many people have relied on it. We're not going to overrule it. Justice Souter and Justice O'Connor have not come out as the conservatives some thought they were, but I remember you and I weren't so sure during those confirmation hearings that Souter was.
What about Justice Thomas? Is there any indication where he came down?
Justice Thomas seems to be on the conservative side. Yes, he is with Justice White, Justice Scalia, and Justice Thomas, but they didn't mount enough votes to overturn Roe versus Wade in significant detail. The important thing is that there is language here that says, yes, some restrictions, some things that will make it more difficult to get an abortion are okay in minimum, moderate, quote, reasonable amount, but they are not opening the door wholesale to courts in the future making abortion a violation, prohibiting abortion altogether, or even regulating it in such a stringent fashion that it becomes tremendously difficult to have an abortion. They are not allowing that.
Now, is this the end of the abortion controversy before the Supreme Court, or is there more to come?
Well, there is more to come. There's a very restrictive abortion provision from Guam that prohibits abortion except in the case of the mother's life and health. There's one from Louisiana that prohibits abortion, but adds another exception that for rape or incest there can be prohibition except for that and the life and health of the mother. And then there is also one coming from Utah which adds as an exception to that severe fetal deformity, but they're all very strict against abortion. This decision, to me, what I've read thus far, and we'll have to go back and read a little further, but it looks to me like this decision says that those restrictions from those states on the right to abortion, those restrictions must fall, that the fundamental right to have an abortion must be upheld. They talk about the right to have an abortion as a fairly strong right. They don't talk about it in the highest order as of fantastic strength, but they talk about it as a fairly strong right, and they talk as though the state must have a pretty strong interest to regulate an abortion, particularly if they try to regulate it during the first 2 trimesters of the pregnancy, which is 6 months.
For 6 months.
That's right. That the state can regulate most freely in the last trimester. That's when the fetus is most like a baby, and the interest in protecting life is the greatest.
Now, of course, politics enters into this. Both sides in the controversy may be able to claim some victory, at least partial victory today. What kind of political impact is this going to have?
Well, I think there may be a big defeat for the one side, the pro-life side, because they said even in the 3rd trimester, when the baby is the biggest, that abortion must be allowed for the life and health of the mother. And health is the thing that has been stretched a lot into mental health, allowing a lot of abortions for mental health. So as I read it now, and we might revise our opinion, that seems to be a defeat. I think politically, this is going to not have much effect one way or the other. It's taken the wind out of the sails of the pro-choice movement that has said these new Bush appointees on the court are going to repeal your right to an abortion. They're going to overrule Roe versus Wade. You should vote against Bush. But on the other side, the pro-life movement that has said these Supreme Court nominees that Bush has nominated are really going to protect the fetus and not allow any abortion of the fetus. They have lost somewhat too. So I don't think either side is going to be able to use this as a rallying cry for the election. And I suppose that is why the justices felt they could come out with this before the election. Maybe we should have guessed it. If they thought it was going to be a bombshell to the election, they might have delayed it.
All right, so it looks like we have a divided court and something that each side can point to as a partial victory, but perhaps not the kind of politically explosive decision that some had expected. Bobbie?
Tony Paul, thank you. For some of our first reaction now to the High Court's ruling on the Pennsylvania abortion law today, we have on the phone with us Janet Benshoff, who is president of the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, which is an abortion rights advocate association. Janet, your first reaction or interpretation to the ruling today, as much as you've heard of it?
Well, you know, first of all, I haven't read the entire decision, but I think the court's preface that it's not disturbing Roe versus Wade or the essence of Roe is very political and erroneous. The Pennsylvania restrictions, if put into place, which were overturned in 1985 by the court, the Pennsylvania restrictions, if they are allowed to stand, mean that Roe in its essence has been overturned. What the Supreme Court is doing is redefining what Roe is, although I don't think they've reached a refinement of that. And I think it's very important for the press and the American people to look at this opinion carefully and realize what is happening here. What is happening here is that abortion is not being treated any longer, and not just abortion, but the right to make decisions about pregnancy, like a fundamental right, like the right to vote, like the right not to attend segregated schools, like the right to travel.
Are you saying then that they're in effect watering down Roe versus Wade by sending it back to the states?
Well, watering it down and overturning, to me, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by those terms, but after today, abortion is not the fundamental right it was yesterday. And that is very significant no matter what the court says. The court is, in essence, upholding the Third Circuit opinion of the Court of Appeals, looking at the Pennsylvania case. The Third Circuit opinion said Roe had already been overturned. Now, the court may be redefining...
All right. Janet, I'm sorry, we need to interrupt you and have you hold just a second. We need to go back to Washington and Reid Collins.
Okay.
All right, let's go back now to the Supreme Court, where around the plaza area there is some avid reaction, and we'll pick up some of it live.
Continue to promote life-affirming alternatives to abortion, to support pro-life candidates for public office, and to work in the states for legal protection of unborn children and their mothers.
Blackmun make it abundantly clear that the constitutional right to choose is hanging by a thread, that we are only one justice away from returning to the painful past before Roe v. Wade, and only a president committed to maintaining the present law can maintain the constitutional right to choose. It may be a court for Bush and for Reagan, but it's our country and our constitutional rights. And I think this election now plainly imposes on all American citizens the obligation to protect our liberties. We can also demand that Congress pass a National Freedom of Choice Act, but we know even if Congress does, it will only become law if we have a new president. I want to say again what I have said many times in many places across this country. I have believed in the rule of Roe v. Wade for 20 years, since I used to teach it in law school. Being pro-choice is not the same thing as being pro-abortion. There are many people who have many different opinions about many different abortions. Those of us who believe in the rule of Roe v. Wade are united in the simple conviction that we don't want to go back to the time when a woman or her doctor were made criminals because they made the decision that they thought was right in their own consciences and with their own hearts. I think this is a very disturbing day. I regret it very much. You have 4 judges plainly committed to repeal Roe v. Wade, 3 others nibbling around the edges, and a brave Justice Blackmun saying he doesn't know how much longer he can hang on. This is one of the things this presidential election is about. And I hope the American people will say in clear and unambiguous terms, we do not want to go back. Those of us who are old enough to remember know that it is not the thing to do. And so I stand here before you today to say that I am not particularly surprised by this decision, that the details are not nearly as important as the fact that 4 people came out forthrightly for repealing Roe v. Wade, and that Justice Blackmun sent us a clear signal that only the next election can preserve it. Thank you very much.
Right, so Governor Clinton in Little Rock, Arkansas, has been moved inside. It was raining outside, hence the delay. The statement in which he hopes that the issue can be made one of the presidential election campaign. As you heard senior White House correspondent Charles Bierabauer intimate from New York, where he's with President Bush, there was an almost audible sigh of relief, perhaps among some of the White House campaign people, in that there is a muted reaction, or at least a blunted reaction, from those who found the Supreme Court split somewhat, at least, on the amount of modification of Roe versus Wade could be comprehended by the Constitution. It didn't become a clear black and white or either issue. And we're going to have a debate on some of those issues and more on the subject of the Pennsylvania decision when we continue.
Today, the right to choose abortion is no longer a fundamental constitutional right.
The decision moves the country sharply away from abortion on demand.
Five-year-old Melanie lives in a shack in the Philippines. At night, she eats only a bowl of rice